You know that feeling when you're just like staring at the bottom of a page?
Oh, yeah.
Your eyes just scanned maybe 300 words.
Yeah.
Your brain successfully processed every single letter. But you realize with this sudden um, sinking feeling that you have absolutely no idea what you just read.
Right. It is an incredibly frustrating, but, completely universal experience.
Your brain just drove for miles with no one behind the wheel.
Exactly. That moment of waking up at the bottom of the page happens because the mechanical act of reading, just moving your eyes and decoding letters, has completely detached from the cognitive act of understanding. You just slipped into autopilot.
And having to drag your eyes all the way back up to the top of that page, just hoping it sticks a second time, well, it's exactly the problem we're tackling today.
It really is.
We are pulling from a super fascinating source for this deep dive. It is an experimental study from Pakistan from a few years back. They focused on a psychological concept called metacognition. And specifically, they wanted to see how it impacts reading comprehension in 8- and 9-year-old children who are attempting to learn English as a second language.
So our mission for this deep dive is to figure out what it actually means to think about thinking.
Yeah.
We are going to look at the specific mechanisms these researchers use to build this mental architecture inside the minds of third graders. And ultimately, we will extract the exact practical strategies that you can use to ensure you never blank out on a page of text again.
But before we get into the classroom experiment, I want to make sure you, listening right now, understand why a study about third graders in the Punjab province actually matters to your daily life.
Because it does. It really does.
It totally does. The cognitive mechanics we're going to talk about are universally applicable.
Right.
Whether you are sorting through like a tidal wave of morning emails or trying to parse a dense financial prospectus or just attempting to read a novel after a long day. Your brain is grappling with the exact same heavy lifting as those kids.
Absolutely.
All right.
So to understand how to fix that autopilot problem, we first have to understand the fundamental difference between simply thinking and metacognition.
Okay, so break that down for us.
Well, the researchers spent a lot of time establishing this baseline. And rather than just throwing academic terms around, they looked at how our understanding of the human brain has evolved. For a long time, psychologists viewed learning as a somewhat passive or, inevitable process.
Passive in what sense? Like we just absorb things by existing?
Partially, yeah. I mean, think about the early theories on cognitive growth. The argument was basically that as we get older, our brains naturally mature, much like our physical muscles.
Right.
So a 5-year-old generally cannot grasp complex algebra because the biological mental structures just aren't there yet. It is a biological timeline.
That makes sense.
Then, a little later, other theorists focused on knowledge improvement. The idea there was that we don't just grow in a vacuum, we acquire new information through social interaction.
Like you learn to tie your shoes because a parent or a teacher sits down and guides you through the process.
Exactly.
So under those two models, getting smarter just means your brain physically matures or somebody socially hands you new information. But where does the meta part come in?
Well, that is the crucial pivot. In the late 70s, a researcher named Flavel looked at those models and realized something was missing. He essentially initiated the term metacognition.
Okay.
He argued that learning isn't just maturing, and it isn't just absorbing facts from a teacher. He defined metacognition as an individual's active awareness about their own thinking progression.
Active awareness.
Right. It is the vigilant, real-time examination of your own comprehension while you are in the middle of a task.
That feels like a massive leap.
Yeah.
Let me try to put a visual on this.
Sure.
If cognitive strategies are the mental muscles you use to drive a car from point A to point B, like physically tuning the steering wheel, hitting the gas pedal, scanning the mirrors.
Right, the mechanical stuff.
Yeah. The metacognitive strategies are the GPS dashboard sitting on the center console. That GPS isn't driving the car, but it is constantly monitoring the route.
Exactly.
It checks your current speed against the speed limit, and it actively recalculates the journey the second you miss a turn. So thinking is simply driving the car. Metacognition is monitoring the journey.
That analogy captures the dynamic perfectly. The complication, however, and the researchers cite a lot of work from the late 80s to highlight this, is that distinguishing between the driver and the GPS is, well, it's notoriously difficult in practice.
Why is that?
Because they overlap constantly. Sometimes a mental strategy is just helping you move the car forward, and sometimes that exact same strategy is helping you monitor how you are driving.
Right,
It
right.
gets really blurry.
So if the theory is that messy, the only way to prove this GPS actually works is to test it in a high-stress environment where cognitive resources are already stretched thin,
Yes.
which is exactly why these researchers went to busy classrooms in Pakistan to run this experiment.
The setting is such a critical variable here. They went to two private schools, the Bahriya Foundation College campuses in Rawalpindi and Gujarat,
Okay.
and they gathered a sample group of third graders, 8 and 9 years old. But remember, these students are learning entirely in English, which is their second language.
Wow. So the cognitive load required just to translate the letters on the page into native concepts in their heads is staggering.
It's massive. They are already driving in a thunderstorm, so to speak.
Wait, if these 8-year-olds are already struggling just to decode the English vocabulary, aren't high-level concepts like self-monitoring and, mental dashboarding way over their heads? Like, how do you even explain metacognition to a third grader?
Well, you don't.
You don't.
No, you don't explain the theory to them. You give them specific, actionable habits that force the GPS to turn on.
Okay.
The researchers gave the teachers a highly structured intervention program consisting of 7 strategies. There was vocabulary building, making connections, questioning, summarizing, predicting, visualizing, and monitoring.
So rather than just telling the kids to pay attention, they scaffolded the entire reading experience.
Exactly.
Okay, let's break a few of those down because the source document gets into the weeds on how these were actually applied. Take the visualizing strategy. How does an 8-year-old do that while struggling with a foreign text?
Visualizing forces a pause in the mechanical reading process. The teacher would have the students read a sentence and then tell them to stop, close their eyes, and picture the scene in their mind.
Oh, I see.
So if a child reads a sentence about a bustling market but cannot mentally picture the colors of the fruit stalls or the noise of the crowd, they instantly realize they didn't actually comprehend the words.
The image in their head is just blank.
Exactly. That blank image is the GPS loudly recalculating, signaling to the child that they need to reread.
That makes total sense. It creates this immediate feedback loop.
It does.
And they did something similar with the making connections strategy, right? A student would read a passage about a dog, and the teacher would prompt them to explicitly state how that relates to a dog they've seen in their own neighborhood.
Right, forcing them to anchor an abstract foreign language into a concrete memory.
Yeah. But out of all 7, the strategy that really fascinated me was the think aloud method.
Oh, the think aloud strategy is arguably the most powerful tool in the entire toolkit. It stems from cognitive research done back in the early 70s. And the mechanics sound deceptively simple. You just talk out loud while you read.
Right.
But the cognitive hack taking place is profound.
Because it completely removes any hiding places for the reader. Like if you're just silently scanning a page, it is incredibly easy to fake understanding, even to yourself.
Absolutely.
But if you have to read a paragraph and then immediately say out loud, I think this character is upset because they lost their toy, well, you are forced to confront whether you actually found that information in the text. You have to narrate your own logic.
Yeah, it forces the reader to model their understanding into a physical output.
Right.
When a student articulates their thought process out loud, they hear their own hesitation. They hear their own gaps in logic.
Wow.
The researchers noted this provides an instant diagnostic tool for the teacher to evaluate the student's progress, but the real transformation happens inside the learner.
Ouch.
The responsibility of checking for understanding shifts. The student is no longer waiting for a pop quiz to tell them they failed. They are catching the failure in real time. They are self-regulating.
That sounds great in theory, but did this toolkit actually work? We are talking about fundamentally altering how young children process language.
It did work.
Yeah, when we look at the data, like the pre-test numbers before the intervention versus the post-test numbers after it, the shifts are massive.
They really are. The data provides a very clear window into how cognitive load works. The numbers validate that when you give someone the tools to monitor their reading, their overall comprehension just skyrockets.
The shift in vocabulary really illustrates this. On the pre-test, only 7% of students were completely familiar with the vocabulary of an unknown passage.
Just 7%.
Yeah, 7%. But during the post-test, after these strategies were implemented, that number jumped to 33%. Feeling comfortable tackling unknown words nearly quintupled.
And we see an even more dramatic shift when it comes to active interaction.
Oh, the questioning skills metrics are a great example of that.
Yes, they leaped from 23% to 47%. Almost half the class was suddenly able to dynamically respond to questions asked at the start, middle, and end of a session.
But the statistic that I found most revealing was Table 4. That one tracked summarizing skills.
Yeah.
In the pretest, literally 0% of the students could summarize the content in their own words.
Right.
0. Post-test, that jumped to 23%.
Well, think about the mechanism behind that jump from 0. When a child reads a dense passage in a second language, 100% of their mental bandwidth is consumed by just decoding the letters into recognizable concepts.
Yeah, you just don't have the space for anything else.
Exactly. There is no working memory left over to track the overarching narrative. Summarizing was at 0% because the cognitive load was totally maxed out.
Right.
By teaching them to visualize, to make connections, and to think aloud, the strategies essentially organized the data for them in real time. It freed up enough mental bandwidth for almost a quarter of the class to step back and grasp the big picture.
Okay, but I have a massive problem with Table 7. I was looking very closely at the breakdown of the data, and there was a glaring anomaly here.
Oh, I know what you're going to say.
If metacognition is entirely about building this mental GPS, then the skill of monitoring should be the absolute star of the show. Yet, Table 7 measured whether learners stopped to review the text and monitored their learning. In the pretest, 10% of kids did this. In the post-test, after all this intensive training, it only went up to 13%. I mean, that is barely a blip.
It is. And it gets even stranger when you look at the middle tier of that same table.
Yes. The category for learners who are only partially involved in understanding the text actually rose. It went from 73% to 77%.
Right.
Why would teaching them to monitor themselves, the very core of the mental dashboard we are talking about, fail to move the needle while everything else improved so drastically?
That discrepancy is actually my favorite part of this entire deep dive.
Really? Why?
Because it reveals the incredibly messy reality of human behavior. The researchers didn't ignore that data point. They kind of buried the explanation in their conclusion, and it completely reframes the entire study.
What did they say?
They noted that an individual child's performance solely depends on his interest in the teacher.
Wait, so the strategies didn't fail? The kids just didn't care?
What the researchers discovered is that metacognition is not a mechanical switch. The GPS analogy holds up perfectly here, but we missed one vital component, the fuel. You can have a state-of-the-art dashboard, but if the car has no gas, the screen stays dark. The data showed that if a teacher's instructional style was dull, or if they relied on rote memorization rather than active engagement, the child's self-monitoring broke down entirely.
So the partial involvement rose because the kids were handed this brilliant toolkit, but without the spark of motivation from an engaged teacher, they just only half-heartedly used it. They just went through the motions.
Exactly that. Metacognition requires immense cognitive energy. It requires a vulnerability and a willingness to stop your momentum, reflect on your own flaws, and admit you don't know something. If the emotional or intellectual engagement provided by the environment isn't there, the human brain will always default to the path of least resistance. And the path of least resistance is passive, unmonitored reading. Your eyes keep moving, but the brain checks out.
Wow. That brings us to the most vital application of this deep dive for you, the listener. We've established that this mental dashboard exists. We know the specific tools like visualizing, connecting, and thinking aloud work beautifully to increase comprehension.
Yeah, they do.
But we also just learned that human engagement is the required fuel to turn the system on.
Yeah.
And here's the harsh reality. You aren't an 8-year-old sitting in a classroom anymore.
No, you're not.
You don't have a teacher pacing at the front of the room, keeping you engaged with a legal contract or a dense industry report.
Which means you have to become your own teacher. You have to manufacture your own engagement to provide the fuel for your mental GPS.
Yes.
And the study actually provides excellent frameworks for this, even though they were designing them for ESL students.
Okay, let's translate those third-grade life hacks into practical adult applications. Let's say you are sitting at your desk and you have to read a confusing, highly technical medical bill or maybe a 40-page commercial lease agreement. How do you apply this toolkit?
Well, a great place to start is adapting the questioning strategy. There was a citation from the early 80s highlighting that self-questioning is the ultimate tool to correct misunderstandings in real time.
Right.
When you are reading that commercial lease, you cannot wait until page 40 to ask yourself if you understood the liability clauses. You have to build artificial checkpoints into the text.
like forced pauses.
Exactly. Read a single paragraph about indemnification. Take your hands off the keyboard and literally ask yourself out loud, if a pipe bursts in this building tomorrow, who pays for it based on what I just read?
That is the adult version of the think aloud strategy. If you can't answer your own question, you aren't allowed to move to the next paragraph. You become the strict teacher auditing your own understanding.
Precisely.
And there is another specific recommendation from the study that applies heavily here. The researchers strongly advise the schools to avoid typical translation-style reading and to rely more on context, clues, and prediction.
That is a critical habit to break for adult professionals.
It really is. When adults read something outside their specific expertise, like that medical bill or a legal document, we tend to do translation-style reading. We focus so hard on translating the heavy industry jargon word by word into plain English that we just exhaust our cognitive load.
Yeah, you burn out halfway down the page.
Right. By the end of the page, we have no idea what the broader document actually means because we spent all our energy decoding the vocabulary. Instead, the study suggests we need to predict and visualize. Stop obsessing over translating every single legal term.
Yes. Look at the context clues and ask, based on the last 3 sentences, where is this argument going? Force your brain to predict the outcome of the paragraph before you finish reading it.
And shifting from translation to prediction forces you to shift from a passive consumer to an active participant.
Exactly. Independent readers take accountability for their own reading. When you actively predict an outcome in a text, say, predicting that a specific clause is going to favor the landlord, you create a stake in the reading process.
You want to know if you're right.
Right. You naturally want to finish the paragraph to see if your prediction was correct. You just artificially manufactured the exact interest that the researchers noted was so vital for the third grader's success.
You essentially trick your brain into caring. If you predict the author's next point, suddenly you are reading the rest of the page, actively hunting for clues to see if you won the bet with yourself.
You are no longer on autopilot because you have a vested interest in the outcome.
And through that process, you become a self-regulated learner.
Oh.
You aren't just letting information wash over you. You are actively managing how that information is being processed and stored.
Yeah, it's incredibly powerful.
Let's take a step back and summarize the journey we've been on today. We started by exploring the concept of metacognition, the idea that you have a mental GPS sitting on your cognitive dashboard, capable of monitoring your own comprehension. We traveled to busy, high-stress classrooms in Pakistan to see how specific reading strategies like visualizing, questioning, and the highly effective think aloud method were used to install this GPS into 8- and 9-year-olds. We saw how reducing their cognitive load allowed their ability to summarize complex texts to skyrocket.
And we also discovered something else.
Yes, crucially, we discovered through a fascinating data anomaly that our ability to self-monitor requires fuel. It relies entirely on active engagement and interest. If you aren't engaged, the GPS simply powers down.
And that leads to a final thought I want to leave you with, building on the mechanics we've unpacked today.
Okay, let's hear it.
This study definitively proved that metacognitive strategies, pausing to self-question, predicting outcomes, and thinking aloud, can radically improve our comprehension of a static physical text. But consider the environment where we actually spend the vast majority of our time reading today. What happens if you take these exact same strategies, which were meticulously designed to help 8-year-olds comprehend simple paragraphs, and apply them to the way you endlessly scroll through your social media feeds or rapidly consume breaking news?
Oh man, that is a terrifying proposition.
Think about the mechanics of your daily digital consumption. If you forced yourself to stop right now, employ the think aloud strategy, and accurately summarize the nuanced arguments of the last 5 posts you just scrolled past on your phone, how much of your daily digital reading would actually hold up to a 3rd grade comprehension standard?
That is deeply unsettling because I know the answer for my own scrolling habits is probably 0.
Right.
And it really brings us right back to the beginning of this deep dive. The next time you find yourself at the bottom of a screen or the bottom of a dense report and you realize you have completely blanked out, don't just drag your eyes back to the top and blindly try harder. Provide the fuel. Turn on the dashboard.
Start predicting and asking questions out loud.
Because the words are sitting right there on the page, but the understanding, that is entirely up to you.